The bullet had torn through his side 3 hours ago, and Giancarlo Valentini was running out of time. He pressed his hand against the wound, feeling the hot pulse of blood between his fingers, and tried to calculate how long he had before his body gave out. The math wasn't good. The ambush had been clean, too clean. 3 men with silenced weapons appearing from nowhere on a street he'd walked 100 times. He'd killed 2 of them before the third got lucky. Lucky. That's what he'd call it later, if there was a later. The Chicago night was bitter cold, the kind of January freeze that turned breath to ice and made wounds go numb before they killed you. Gio had left a trail of blood across 4 blocks, doubling back, using every trick he'd learned in 15 years of being the man his family called when problems needed to disappear. But tonight, he was the problem. And if he didn't find help soon, he was going to disappear permanently. The hospital rose in front of him like a prayer he didn't believe in. Chicago General. Bright lights, bustling with the kind of activity that meant people who could stop the bleeding, people who could keep him breathing long enough to figure out who had set him up and make them pay. Also, people who would ask questions, file reports, call police. He couldn't go through the front door, couldn't answer the questions that would follow, but there was a side entrance he'd used once before years ago when another Valentini had needed medical attention without the paperwork. The emergency bay, where ambulances came and went and one more bleeding man might slip through unnoticed. Gio pushed through the doors and found himself in chaos. Doctors shouting, nurses running, the aftermath of something big, a car accident maybe, or a shooting that had nothing to do with him. Perfect cover. He stumbled past 2 orderlies arguing about a gurney and through a door marked Trauma Unit, authorized personnel only. The room was bright and cold and full of equipment he didn't recognize. He got 3 steps inside before his legs gave out. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was a woman's face. Dark skin, darker eyes, hair pulled back from features that registered somewhere between shock and fury. A surgeon, based on the scrubs and the blood on her gloves, from whatever patient she'd been working on before he crashed her party. What the hell? The rest of her words dissolved into static as the world went black. Yara Baptiste had seen a lot of things in her 8 years as a trauma surgeon. Gunshot wounds, stab wounds, car accidents that turned bodies into puzzles she had to reassemble. She had learned to compartmentalize, to see the patient instead of the person, to focus on the mechanics of saving lives instead of the stories behind the damage. At 28, she was one of the youngest attending surgeons in Chicago General's history. Her colleagues called her cold, a compliment in the trauma unit, where emotion could cost lives. Her residents called her terrifying, which she took as a greater compliment still. And her patients, if they survived long enough to remember, called her a miracle worker. She didn't feel like a miracle worker. She felt like a woman running from ghosts, bearing her grief in 70-hour weeks and surgeries that demanded every ounce of her focus. The face staring back at her from the chrome of the supply cabinet was familiar but distant. Deep brown skin that her grandmother said came from the Baptiste side. Natural hair pulled back in a practical twist. Dark eyes that her father used to say could see straight through to a person's soul. She'd lost weight since her last vacation, her cheekbones sharper than they should be, the evidence of too many skipped meals and not enough sleep. But she had never had a man built like a weapon collapse in her operating room, bleeding from a wound that screamed mob hit. "Get him on the table," she said, the words coming automatically even as her mind raced through the implications, "and close that door." The nurse, Angela, 20 years her senior and unflappable in every crisis, raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. The door clicked shut, the lock engaged. "He needs to be logged in," Angela said. Protocol can wait until he's not dying." Yara was already cutting away his shirt, exposing the wound. Entry point on the left side, no exit wound. The bullet was still in there, lodged somewhere that was causing damage with every passing second. "Get me a trauma tray, and blood. Start typing, but give me oneg while we wait." The man on her table was built like a fighter. Muscles corded beneath olive skin, scarred knuckles that spoke of violence given as well as received. A thin scar ran along his jaw, old and faded, and on his right shoulder, partially visible where she'd cut his shirt, a tattoo that made her blood run cold. A lion with a crown, olive branches, Roman numerals. She knew that symbol. Everyone who'd grown up on the South Side knew that symbol. The Valentinis, Italian-American crime family, fingers in everything from construction to gambling, to the kind of businesses that made people disappear, the kind of people who might have killed her father. Yara's hands didn't shake, they never shook, but something cold and heavy settled in her chest as she looked at the man bleeding out on her table. She could let him die. It would be easy. A miscalculation, a delay, a complication that she couldn't have foreseen. No one would question it. One less monster in the world. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. We save everyone, baby girl. That's the job. We don't get to choose who deserves to live. Sergeant Marcus Baptiste had been dead for 12 years, but his lessons lived on in his daughter's hands. Scalpel, Yara said, and went to work. The surgery took 4 hours. The bullet had nicked his spleen and lodged against a rib, and extracting it required the kind of precision that left Yara's shoulders aching and her scrubs soaked through with sweat. The work was delicate. One wrong move and she'd puncture the spleen completely, turn a survivable wound into a death sentence. She worked methodically, millimeter by millimeter, while the monitors beeped their steady rhythm and Angela handed her instruments without being asked. This was what she loved about surgery, the focus, the control, the ability to hold someone's life in her hands and choose to save it. In the operating room, there were no gray areas. Only the body on the table and the problem that needed solving. But tonight, the gray areas kept intruding. Every time she glanced at that tattoo, the lion, the crown, the Roman numerals, she felt something dark twist in her stomach. This man had hurt people, probably killed people. He was part of a world that had taken her father from her, and she was fighting to keep him alive. Halfway through the procedure, his heart stopped. V-fib, Angela called out, her voice sharp but controlled. He's crashing. Yara didn't hesitate. Paddles, charged to 200. The shock hit him, his body arcing off the table. Nothing. Again, 250. Another shock, another flatline. For 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, Yara stood over a dead man, a dead Valentini, a monster whose death would be a service to the world. 300, she said. Now. The shock hit, the monitor screamed. And then, a blip. Another. The rhythm stabilizing into something that looked like life. He's back, Angela breathed. He's back, Yara repeated, and didn't let herself think about why she was relieved. She worked in silence for the next 2 hours, focused entirely on the mechanics of keeping this stranger alive, pushing away every thought about who he was and what he represented. When it was done, she stepped back and let Angela take over the monitoring. The man would live. Against all odds, against her better judgment, against every instinct screaming to let him bleed out on her floor, he would live. Who is he? Angela asked quietly, once the patient was stable and breathing on his own. I don't know. It was a lie. Yara had spent the last hour studying that tattoo every time she glanced at his shoulder, recognizing it from the research she'd done in the dark years, after her father's death. The Valentini lion. The mark of a made man. He's trouble, Angela said. Yes. We should report him. Yes. Neither of them moved toward the phone. Angela had been Yara's mentor since residency. She knew about Marcus Baptiste, knew about the questions that had never been answered, the investigation that had been quietly closed, the daughter who had never stopped searching for the truth. Take a break, Angela said finally. I'll watch him. You decide what you want to do. Yara walked to the staff lounge on autopilot, her body moving through familiar hallways while her mind churned. She poured herself a coffee she didn't want and stared out the window at the Chicago skyline, glittering against the pre-dawn darkness. Her hands were still steady. They were always steady during surgery, always had been. It was the one thing she could count on, that her body would perform even when her mind was in chaos. Her father had been killed during a routine traffic stop. That was the official story. He'd pulled over a car with expired tags and been shot by someone in the back seat. The shooter was never found. The case went cold within months. But Marcus Baptiste had been investigating something before he died. Off the books, off the record, the kind of investigation that got cops transferred or killed. Yara had found his notes years later, hidden in a safety deposit box she didn't know existed until the bank contacted her about unpaid fees. She remembered that day, sitting in the sterile office of Chicago Trust and Savings, hands shaking as she opened the metal box. Inside were notebooks, photographs, newspaper clippings, and a letter addressed to her. Baby girl, it began, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. She'd read that letter 100 times since then, 1,000 times. Memorized every word, every loop of her father's familiar handwriting. I've stumbled onto something bigger than I realized. Cops on the take, city officials looking the other way, A network of corruption that goes deeper than anything I've seen in 20 years on the force. I'm close to proving it, close enough that I've started watching my back in ways I never had to before. If something happens to me, don't let them bury the truth. Don't let them win. The notes were incomplete, fragmentary, but they pointed to a connection between Chicago's organized crime families and a network of corruption that reached into the police department itself. Her father had been close to something, close enough to die for it. Close enough that his daughter had spent 12 years trying to finish what he started. She had become a doctor because saving lives felt like the opposite of what had been done to her father. Had chosen trauma surgery because it was the hardest specialty, the one that demanded the most, the one that left no room for grief or rage or anything except the work. But the investigation had never stopped. Late nights poring over her father's notes, conversations with retired cops who remembered Marcus Baptiste and what he'd been working on. A board in her closet covered with photographs and newspaper clippings and string-connecting names she couldn't quite link together. 12 years, and she'd gotten nowhere. The trail was too cold, the system too protected, the people involved too powerful, and now a Valentini was lying in her operating room, breathing because she had chosen to save him. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. He woke up angry. Yara had expected that. Men like him, dangerous men, violent men, men who wore their damage like armor, didn't wake up grateful. They woke up assessing threats, calculating odds, preparing to fight their way out of whatever corner they'd been backed into. What she hadn't expected was the way his eyes found hers across the room and stayed there. Dark brown, almost black, carrying pain that went deeper than the wound she'd stitched together. He looked at her like he was trying to memorize her face, like he was cataloging every detail for future reference. It could have been threatening. Instead, it felt like being seen. You're awake. She kept her voice clinical, professional. That's impressive. Most people would be out for another 12 hours after the surgery you just had. Who are you? His voice was rough, scraped raw from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour ago. Doctor Yara Baptiste. I'm the one who pulled a bullet out of your spleen and put you back together. She stepped closer, checking his vitals on the monitor beside his bed. You're welcome. Where am I? Chicago General Trauma Unit. She met his gaze. Private room, no police, no questions, yet. The last word hung between them. He heard the threat in it, understood that she held his fate in her hands and could change her mind at any moment. Why? Why what? Why no police? Why the private room? Why? He tried to sit up, winced, fell back against the pillows. Why am I still alive? Because I'm good at my job. She crossed her arms, keeping distance between them. The rest of it, I'm still figuring out. He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those dark, assessing eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. Careful? You know who I am? I know what that tattoo means. And you saved me anyway. Like I said, I'm good at my job. She moved to check his IV, adjusting the drip with hands that remained perfectly steady. I save everyone who ends up on my table. I don't make exceptions based on what they've done or who they work for. But you're thinking about it. She didn't answer. Couldn't answer because he was right. She was thinking about it, had been thinking about it since she saw that lion on his shoulder and recognized the symbol of everything she'd spent her life hating. What's your name? She asked instead. A pause, then, Gio. That's short for something? Giancarlo, but nobody calls me that except my grandmother when she's angry. Despite everything, Yara felt her mouth twitch. Does she get angry often? Not as often as she should. Something shifted in his expression, a softening that was there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. You saved my life, Dr. Baptiste. I don't forget things like that. Is that a threat or a thank you? It's a fact. He held her gaze. In my world, debts matter. You have one from me now. I always pay my debts. I don't want anything from you. Doesn't matter what you want. Debt exists anyway. The smart move was to report him. Pick up the phone, call the police, let the system handle whatever mess he'd gotten himself into. That was the safe choice. The choice that wouldn't entangle her further in a world she'd spent her whole life trying to avoid. Instead, she said, get some rest. Your body needs time to heal, even if your stubbornness won't admit it. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. Baptiste. He pronounced it correctly. Baptiste, the French way, the way her father used to say it. That's a Haitian name? Jamaican, my father's family. Was he a doctor too? The question landed like a knife. She turned to face him, keeping her expression neutral. He was a cop. Southside Precinct, 20 years on the force. She paused. He's been dead for 12 years. Something flickered across Gio's face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. I'm sorry. Are you? The challenge hung between them. He didn't look away. I am. Whatever you think of people like me, I understand loss. His jaw tightened. My mother died when I was 19. My father... He stopped. Loss is loss. It doesn't matter which side of the law you're on. She wanted to hate him, wanted to hold on to the simple certainty that he was a monster and she had made a mistake saving him. But the pain in his voice was real, and she had spent too many years studying human damage to miss it when it was right in front of her. Get some rest, she repeated, and left before he could say anything else. Over the next 3 days, she told herself she was just monitoring a patient, checking vitals, changing dressings, ensuring that her surgical work was healing properly. Professional obligations, nothing more. But she found herself in his room more often than necessary. Found herself answering his questions, careful questions, probing questions, the kind that a man used to extracting information might ask. And found herself asking questions of her own. He was from New York. His family had sent him to Chicago to handle business with their allies here. The Ricci's, he said, though he didn't explain what kind of business. The ambush had come out of nowhere, which meant either the Kovacs had finally made their move or someone inside his own organization had betrayed him. The Kovacs, Yara said, testing the name. I've heard of them. Eastern European, right? They've been at war with my family for generations. On and off. Sometimes cold, sometimes hot. Right now, it's heating up. He shifted in the bed, wincing at the pull of his stitches. They want what we have. Territory, connections, legitimacy. They're willing to burn everything down to get it. And where do you fit into all that? His expression shuddered. I'm the one they send when burning things down is necessary. Any sensible person would have been horrified. Instead, she found herself curious about the pain beneath the words. The way he said it like a confession, not a boast. How did you end up doing that? I was good at it. Simple, matter of fact. When my mother died, I was angry. At the world, at God, at my father for not saving her. The family saw that anger and gave me somewhere to put it. His hands clenched on the blanket. I was 19. I thought I was being useful. I didn't understand what I was becoming until it was too late to become anything else. It's never too late. He looked at her, really looked, with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to her bones. That's a nice thing to believe. It's true. Is it? He leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion pulling at his features. I've done things that can't be undone. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. Made choices that... He stopped. Some roads only go one direction, Doctor. I made my choices. I live with them. That sounds like someone who's given up. That sounds like someone who knows himself. They stared at each other across the hospital bed, the monitors beeping softly in the silence. Yara had the strange sensation of standing at the edge of something, a cliff, a decision, a moment that would define everything that came after. Tell me about your mother, she said. The request surprised them both. Gio's expression shifted, vulnerability cracking through the armor. Why? Because you mentioned her twice. Because you carry her with you. She sat in the chair beside his bed, settling in. Because I'm stuck here monitoring your ungrateful self anyway, and we might as well talk about something real. His laugh was rough, startled out of him. You're not what I expected? What did you expect? Someone scared. Someone who'd treat me like a bomb about to go off. His eyes held hers. You don't look at me like that. Should I? Probably. He was quiet for a long moment, then... Her name was Serafina. She was a piano teacher. She used to play Chopin when I couldn't sleep, this nocturne that still makes me cry if I hear it unexpectedly. His voice caught. She was the gentlest person I ever knew, and she married my father anyway, knowing what he was, knowing what the family was. She said love was worth the risk. Was she right? She died of cancer when I was 19. My father was at her bedside holding her hand. He didn't speak for a week afterward. Gio's jaw tightened. So yes, I think she was right. Love was worth it, even when it destroyed us. Yara thought about her own father, about the way he'd kissed her forehead every morning before his shift, the way he'd called her baby girl, even when she was too old for it, the way he'd believed in justice so fiercely that it had gotten him killed. My father used to say that love was the only thing worth dying for, she said quietly. He believed in protecting people, in doing the right thing, even when it cost him. And it did cost him. Yes. She met his eyes. It cost him everything. Which do you think it is? Yara asked during one of their late-night conversations. She'd stopped pretending these were medical check-ins. They were something else now, something she didn't have a name for. Gio's expression was hard. Could be either. The Kovacs have been pushing for months, looking for weakness, but that hit was too clean, too professional. Kovac soldiers are brutal, but they're not subtle. So someone betrayed you. Someone gave me up. His hands clenched on the blanket. I'm going to find out who. And then what? He looked at her, and for a moment the mask slipped. She saw the violence underneath, the capacity for damage that lived in every line of his body. Any sensible woman would have been afraid. Then I'm going to make sure they never betray anyone again. The promise ought to have horrified her. Instead, she understood it. The desire for justice, for closure, for making the people who hurt you pay. She had felt it every day since her father died. My father was investigating something, she said. The words came out before she could stop them, pulled from a place she normally kept locked tight. Before he was killed. Something to do with organized crime in Chicago. Gio went very still. He never told me what it was. I found his notes years later, but they're incomplete. All I know is that he was close to something, close enough that someone wanted him dead. And you think it was someone like me? I think it was someone in your world. She met his gaze. I've spent 12 years trying to find out who, trying to finish what he started. The silence stretched between them. When Gio spoke, his voice was different, lower, more careful. If I help you, if I find out what your father was investigating and who killed him, would you want to know the truth, even if it was ugly, even if it implicated people you'd never be able to touch? Yes. Even if knowing put you in danger? My father died for this. I'm not going to let his death mean nothing. Gio nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes. Okay, he said. I'll find out. But you need to understand. The world you're asking me to dig into doesn't let people go. Once you know, you can't unknow. And the people who buried whatever your father found will do anything to keep it buried. I understand. Do you? He reached out, his scarred hand closing around her wrist. Not hard, not threatening, but firm enough to demand her attention. I've done things, Dr. Baptiste, things that would make you sick if you knew the details. I'm not a good man. But I pay my debts, and you gave me my life, so I'm going to help you. Just understand who you're making a deal with. She looked at his hand on her wrist, at the tattoo visible beneath his hospital gown, at the dark eyes that held both warning and something that looked almost like hope. I understand, she said again. Now get some sleep. You're being discharged in the morning. Gio was released from Chicago General 5 days after he'd crashed through its doors. Yara signed his discharge papers herself, using a name that wasn't his, John Doe, victim of a mugging gone wrong. The paperwork would disappear into the system, buried beneath the mountain of cases that Chicago's underfunded hospitals processed every day. Relief would have been the logical response. Instead, she felt something closer to loss. I'll be in touch, he said, standing in the doorway of his room. He was dressed in clothes someone had brought. Black, of course, head to toe black, like he was trying to become a shadow. When I have something. How will you find me? I found my way into your operating room with a bullet in my side. Finding your phone number shouldn't be too hard. She almost smiled. Is that supposed to be reassuring? It's supposed to be honest. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell soap and antiseptic, and something underneath that was just him. Thank you. For my life. For trusting me with your father's story. He paused. I won't let you down. Don't make promises you can't keep. I never do. He left. The hospital felt emptier without him, which was ridiculous. He'd been a patient, a complication, a dangerous man she never ought to have helped in the first place. Gratitude for his absence would have been the sensible response. Instead, she found herself checking her phone every hour, waiting for a message that didn't come. 3 weeks passed. Yara threw herself into work, taking double shifts, volunteering for surgeries no one else wanted. She told herself she was being dedicated. Angela told her she was running from something. Angela was probably right. The text came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number, I found something. Need to meet in person, name a place. Her heart hammered as she typed back, coffee shop on Wabash. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. The response came immediately, I'll be there. She didn't sleep that night. The coffee shop was crowded, which was why she'd chosen it. Witnesses, safety in numbers, the illusion of normalcy while discussing her father's murder with a man who made people disappear for a living. The walk from her car to the entrance felt longer than expected. 3 weeks of silence, 3 weeks of wondering if he'd found what she was looking for, 3 weeks of trying not to think about the way his eyes had looked when he promised to help her. She'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing, that he was just another dangerous man who would disappear from her life as suddenly as he'd entered it. Then she saw him through the window, and her heart did something complicated. Gio was already there when she arrived, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall, the position of someone who needed to see every entrance, every threat, every possible escape route. He looked different in civilian clothes, less like a patient and more like the dangerous man she knew him to be. Black jacket over a black shirt, dark jeans, the kind of casual that probably cost more than her monthly salary. But his face was different too. Leaner, tired, like the past 3 weeks had cost him something. He stood when she approached, old-fashioned manners from a man who broke bones for money. You look better, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. The words were automatic, the kind of thing a doctor would say. But she meant something else underneath, something she didn't want to examine too closely. You look tired. Charming. His mouth twitched. I never claimed to be charming. That's my cousin Marco's department. You have a cousin named Marco? I have about 12 cousins, depending on how you count. Family reunions are complicated. He signaled the waitress, ordered coffee for both of them without asking what she wanted. When it arrived, he wrapped his hands around his cup and fixed her with a serious look. Before I tell you anything, I need you to understand something. What? I found out who killed your father, and I can give you justice. He paused. But once you know, you can't unknow. The people involved, they're not strangers. They're part of my world, part of my family in some ways, and exposing them will have consequences. Consequences for who? For me? For relationships I've spent my whole life building, for the balance of power in my organization. His eyes held hers. I'm willing to accept those consequences, but I need you to understand what you're asking me to sacrifice. She felt something shift in her chest. He wasn't just bringing her information. He was choosing her, choosing justice for her father over his own interests. Why? She asked. Because you saved my life. Because you deserve the truth. Because some things are more important than politics and alliances. He took a breath. Because I look at you and I want to be the kind of man who does the right thing, even when it costs him. What I'm about to tell you is going to hurt. I need you to understand that before I start. Yara's stomach clenched. I've been preparing for this for 12 years. Preparing isn't the same as ready. He took a breath. Your father was investigating a protection racket. Ricci operation. They were squeezing small businesses on the south side, using the police department to look the other way. He figured out the connection between the precinct captain and the family, started building a case that could have brought down half the operation. The captain? She felt cold. Captain Morrison? He's dead now. Heart attack 3 years ago. But yeah. Morrison was on the Ricci payroll. So were 6 other cops in your father's precinct. Gio's voice was flat, factual, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Your father figured it out. Started documenting everything, the payments, the meetings, the way certain cases got buried while others got fast-tracked. He was building a case. He was building a bomb. One that could have blown up Morrison, the Ricci's, half the South Side power structure. Gio paused. And he made the mistake of confronting one of them. Thought he could convince them to flip, testify against the others. Instead, they reported back to their handlers. And the Ricci's had him killed. No. The word hung in the air. Yara stared at him, confusion breaking through the numbness. The Ricci's didn't order the hit. Your father was a problem, but he wasn't an immediate threat. His case was circumstantial, and Morrison had lawyers who could have buried it for years. The Ricci's wanted him scared off, not dead. Then who? Gio was quiet for a long moment. His hands tightened around his coffee cup, knuckles going white. I need you to understand something before I tell you this, he said. What I'm about to say, it doesn't just affect you. It affects my family, my relationships, everything I've built over 27 years. Tell me. The order came from someone inside my family, someone who was running operations with the Ricci's and couldn't afford the exposure, someone who decided that a dead cop was easier to manage than a live one asking questions. Who? Salvatore Ricci. The name meant nothing to her, ought to have meant nothing. But she saw the weight of it on Gio's face and understood that it meant everything to him. Who is Salvatore Ricci to you? He's my aunt's husband. Francesca Valentini married him 30 years ago to seal an alliance between our families. He runs the Chicago operation, answers to my grandfather in New York. Gio's hands were white-knuckled around his coffee cup. He killed your father, Yara, and I'm going to make him pay for it. The world tilted. She reached for the table to steady herself, feeling the ground shift beneath her feet. The coffee shop noise faded to static. The clatter of cups, the murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, all of it became distant, unreal. The only thing that felt solid was the table under her hands and Gio's eyes, watching her with a mixture of concern and determination. You're telling me, she said slowly, that your family killed my father. I'm telling you that a member of my family, by marriage, not by blood, murdered an innocent man to protect a dirty operation, and I'm telling you that I won't let him get away with it. Why? The word came out sharp, cutting. Why do you care? He's your family, your alliance, because you saved my life. His eyes met hers, burning with something that looked like conviction. Because my mother always taught me that some things are more important than blood. Because there are lines that shouldn't be crossed, and killing cops who are just trying to do their jobs is one of them. Pretty words from a man who makes people disappear. He didn't flinch. I've killed. I've hurt people, scared people, done things that would give you nightmares. But I've never killed an innocent. Never taken out someone who didn't know the risks, didn't choose the life. Your father was a good cop doing his job. That should have protected him. Should have. I know. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not touching. I know should have doesn't bring him back. I know words don't fix anything. But I can give you justice. Real justice. Not the kind that gets buried in paperwork and politics. What does that mean? It means Salvatore Ricci is going to pay for what he did. How that happens is up to you. She stared at him. This man who had been her patient, her complication, her unexpected ally. This man who was offering her everything she'd spent 12 years searching for. I need to think, she said. I can't. Take all the time you need. He stood, leaving money on the table for the coffee. I'll be waiting, however long it takes. He left. She sat in the coffee shop for 2 more hours, staring at nothing, feeling the foundations of her world crack and shift. Salvatore Ricci, a name she'd never heard before tonight, a man who had ordered her father's death like it was nothing, a problem to be solved, a loose end to be tied off. 12 years, 12 years of searching, and the answer had been sitting in the same room as her at Valentini family dinners. Had probably shaken her hand, smiled at her, pretended to be nothing more than a businessman with legitimate concerns. The rage that rose up in her was old and familiar. The same rage she'd felt at 16, standing in her father's empty bedroom, realizing he was never coming home. The same rage that had driven her through medical school, through residency, through every impossible surgery and every sleepless night. But underneath the rage was something else, something newer, more complicated. Gio could have lied, could have protected his family, buried the truth, let her spend the rest of her life chasing ghosts. Instead, he'd handed her the weapon she needed, and in doing so, had put himself at risk. That meant something. It meant everything. The offer hung between them, dangerous, impossible, exactly what she'd been waiting 12 years to hear. I don't want more blood, she said. I became a doctor to save lives, not take them. I understand. But I want him to suffer. I want him to lose everything. I want him to know why. Gio nodded. Then that's what you'll get. Over the next month, they met in secret. Coffee shops, parking garages, the back booth of a restaurant in Chinatown, where nobody asked questions. Gio brought her evidence: financial records, witness statements, photographs that documented years of criminal activity. Yara brought her father's notes, filling in gaps, connecting dots that had eluded her for more than a decade. They built a case. Not for the police, both of them knew that system was too compromised to trust, but for something more personal. A reckoning that would destroy Salvatore Ricci without turning Yara into a killer or making her complicit in murder. The work was meticulous. Gio had contacts she couldn't have imagined: former associates who owed him favors, informants who feared him enough to talk, hackers who could find financial records buried in offshore accounts. He moved through this world with the confidence of someone who had been bred to it, but she noticed that he never seemed proud of it. If anything, he seemed tired. "How do you live with it?" she asked one night as they sat in his car outside her apartment building. The heater hummed softly, fogging the windows. "Knowing what you've done, knowing who you are." He didn't answer right away. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white. "Some days I don't." His voice was rough. "Some days I wake up and the weight of it is so heavy I can barely breathe. And then I remember that I don't have a choice. This is what I am. This is what I was made to be. You always have a choice." "Do I?" He turned to look at her, and in the dim light, his face was stripped of its usual hardness. "If I walked away tomorrow, if I told my family I was done, people would die. Not bad people, necessarily. Just people who depend on me to handle the things that need handling. People who would be left exposed without someone standing between them and the Kovacs. So you stay to protect them. I stay because I don't know how to be anything else." He reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek. Until I started imagining what it might be like to want more than survival." She caught his hand, pressing it against her face. "What do you want?" "I want to be the kind of man you could respect. The kind who builds things instead of breaking them." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "I want to wake up next to you without feeling like I'm contaminating something pure." "I'm not pure. You save lives. You heal people. That's about as pure as it gets in my world. I also saved you, and you're not exactly innocent." His laugh was dark, self-deprecating. "No, I'm not." He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "But you make me want to be better, and that's something I haven't felt in a very long time." And somewhere in those stolen hours, something else grew between them. She didn't know when it started. Maybe when he showed up to their third meeting with a split lip and refused to explain how he got it, and she found herself dabbing antiseptic on the wound with hands that trembled. Maybe when he started asking about her life, not her father's case, but her favorite food, her childhood in Chicago, the grandmother in Jamaica who called every Sunday and prayed for her to find a good man. "She'd have a heart attack if she knew about you," Yara said during one of those late-night conversations. Gio's mouth curved. "Because I'm in the mob, or because I'm Italian?" "Both. Although she might forgive the Italian part if you learned to cook jerk chicken." "I can learn." His voice was serious beneath the lightness. "I'm good at learning things I care about." The smart move was to deflect. Remind him that they were business partners, co-conspirators, nothing more. Instead, she found herself saying, "My grandmother makes the best rice and peas you've ever tasted. I'll take you to meet her someday." The words hung between them, an invitation to a future neither of them had any right to be planning. "I'd like that," Gio said. And the way he looked at her when he said it made her forget, just for a moment, all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The first kiss happened 2 months after his discharge, in the parking garage of the hospital where she'd saved his life. He'd come to bring her evidence. She'd stayed late after a brutal shift, 12 hours of surgeries that had left her drained and shaking and desperate for something that felt like hope. There had been a child on her table, 6 years old, victim of a drive-by that had nothing to do with gangs or crime, just random violence that had torn through her small body like a storm. Yara had saved her. The girl would walk again, would laugh again, would grow up to have a life that mattered. But the victory felt hollow. There was always another shooting, another victim, another child whose body she'd have to piece back together. Gio had taken one look at her face and pulled her into his arms without asking. She shouldn't have let him. Shouldn't have collapsed against his chest like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept crumbling. But she was so tired, and his arms felt so safe, and for just a moment she wanted to stop being strong. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "I've got you. You can't fix this. I know, but I can stand here while you fall apart, and I can make sure you don't have to do it alone." She pulled back to look at him. This man who had killed people, who had lived in darkness so long, he'd forgotten what light felt like. And in his eyes, she saw something that surprised her. Fear. Not of her, not of this. Fear that he wasn't enough, that he couldn't be what she needed. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you." And then she kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't careful. It was desperation meeting desperation. Two people clinging to each other in the dark because the alternative was drowning alone. His mouth was hot against hers, his hands tangled in her hair, and she couldn't remember ever wanting anything as much as she wanted him. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads pressed together. "This is insane," she said. "Yes. You're everything I should hate. I know. I'm probably going to regret this. Probably." His hands cupped her face, rough calluses against her cheeks. "Do you want me to stop?" She thought about her father, about 12 years of grief and rage, about the man who had given her answers and was offering her something more. "No," she said. "I don't want you to stop." They fell into each other like gravity, like inevitability. He came to her apartment for the first time a week later, showed up at midnight with takeout from her favorite Thai place, and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than her rent. They ate on her couch with their knees touching and talked about everything except the case, except the violence, except the 1,000 reasons they shouldn't be doing this. The apartment was small, a one-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades, with thin walls and unreliable heat and a view of the L tracks that made sleep difficult when she wasn't exhausted. But it was hers. The first place she'd ever lived alone, the refuge she'd built after years of sharing space with roommates and lovers who never quite fit. She watched Gio take in the details. The photographs on the walls, her father in uniform, her grandmother in Jamaica, her graduation from medical school. The books stacked on every surface, medical texts and mystery novels and poetry collections she'd inherited from her mother. The board in her bedroom covered with her father's case, that she'd hastily covered with a sheet before letting him inside. "You live like someone who's ready to run," he observed. "Nothing too permanent. Nothing you couldn't pack in an hour." "I've been running since I was 16, since my father died and everything I thought I knew turned out to be a lie." "What lie?" "That the world was fair, that good people were protected, that justice actually meant something." She took a long sip of wine. "He was a good cop, Gio, the best I ever knew. And they killed him for it. And nobody did anything about it. So you decided to do something yourself. I decided I couldn't live in a world where his death meant nothing, even if finding the truth took my whole life." He reached out, his fingers brushing her jaw in a gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever we find, whatever happens, you don't have to carry this alone." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it felt like a physical pain. "People keep leaving," she said quietly. "My father left. My mother, she couldn't handle the grief, moved back to Jamaica when I was 18. Even Angela, my mentor at the hospital, she's retiring next year. Everyone I've ever depended on has eventually gone. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that." "No." His eyes held hers, steady and serious. "But I can promise to fight for every day we have. I can promise that leaving you would be the hardest thing I've ever done, and I've done some hard things." She kissed him instead of answering. Some things were too big for words. She learned that he loved jazz, that he spoke 4 languages, that his mother had died of cancer when he was 19, and he'd never really recovered from losing her. "My father blamed himself," he said, staring at the wine glass in his hands. "Thought if he'd had more money, better doctors, he could have saved her. He threw himself into the business after that. Became harder, colder. I think part of him died with her." "And you?" "I became what the family needed me to be." His jaw tightened. "The enforcer. The one who handles problems. My cousin Dominic was always the heir, the golden boy. Marco was the charmer. I was the weapon." "Is that all you are?" He looked at her then, something vulnerable breaking through the hardness. "I don't know anymore. I thought I did. Then a doctor who should have let me die decided to save my life, and now I'm sitting on her couch drinking wine and wondering if I can be something else." She took the glass from his hands and set it aside. Then she kissed him, slow and deep, trying to tell him with her body what words couldn't express. You're more than what they made you. I see it. Let me help you find it. They made love that night. Not the desperate collision from the parking garage, but something gentler, something that felt like a beginning. She hadn't expected tenderness from a man built for violence, hadn't expected the way he touched her like she was precious, like she was something worth protecting. His hands that had hurt people, hands that carried scars from 100 fights, traced her body with reverence. I don't deserve this, he whispered against her skin. I don't deserve you. Let me decide what you deserve. And she did. She decided that this moment, this man, this impossible connection was worth every risk. Worth the danger and the complications and the voice in her head that kept screaming she was making a mistake. Some mistakes were worth making. Afterward, lying tangled together in her bed, she asked, what happens when this is over? When Salvatore pays for what he did? I don't know. His fingers traced patterns on her shoulder. I've never thought about after before. Never had a reason to. And now? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, now I'm starting to think there might be more to life than blood and duty. Now I'm wondering what it would feel like to build something instead of destroy. It wasn't a promise, but it was more than she'd dared to hope for. The reckoning came on a cold night in late spring. Gio had spent weeks gathering evidence since he'd started working with Yara, but the investigation had actually begun long before they met. He'd been quietly watching Salvatore for years, noting discrepancies, filing away suspicions. Yara's father's case had given him the final pieces and the motivation to act. He'd brought his cousin Dominic into it, the heir, the future head of the family, the one person with enough power to sanction what came next. The meeting with Dominic had been tense. They'd sat across from each other in the brownstone study in Brooklyn, Dominic's expression unreadable as Gio laid out everything he'd found. You're asking me to move against family, Dominic said when Gio finished, against an alliance that's kept the peace in Chicago for 30 years. I'm asking you to address a wrong that should never have happened. Gio's voice was steady, but his hands were clenched beneath the table. Marcus Baptiste was a good cop. He was murdered because he stumbled onto Salvatore's dirty operations that weren't sanctioned by our family, that put our name on crimes we didn't authorize. And this woman you're protecting, the cop's daughter, she matters to you? It wasn't a question. Dominic saw everything. It was what made him dangerous and what would make him a good leader someday. She matters, Gio admitted. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because Salvatore crossed a line. He used our name, our protection, to cover a murder that had nothing to do with family business. He made us complicit in something dishonorable. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, then, Grandfather won't like this. Grandfather doesn't need to know the details. He needs to know that Salvatore has become a liability, that his unauthorized operations have attracted federal attention and put the Chicago Alliance at risk. That's true? That's true. Gio pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Federal investigators have been building a case for months. They don't have enough yet, but they're getting close. If we don't handle this ourselves, the feds will do it for us, and they won't be as surgical. Dominic reviewed the documents. His expression didn't change, but Gio saw the calculation happening behind his eyes, the weighing of costs and benefits, the strategic thinking that made Dominic the heir and Gio the enforcer. Not a hit, Dominic said finally. That would start a war with Chicago, but justice, real justice, that we can manage. What did you have in mind? The plan they developed together was elegant. Evidence of Salvatore's unauthorized operations would reach federal investigators through anonymous channels. The dirty cops would be exposed, their pensions stripped, their reputations destroyed, and Salvatore himself would face a choice: disappear quietly or watch everything he'd built crumble around him while the Valentinis withdrew their protection. And Francesca? Gio asked. His aunt, Salvatore's wife, had been a Valentini before she was a Ricci. Her loyalty would be torn. Francesca will be given the truth and the choice, Dominic said. She can stand by her husband and fall with him, or she can protect her children and her legacy. I know which one she'll choose. You're sure? Francesca is a Valentini. Blood runs deeper than marriage, especially when that marriage was always more alliance than love. Dominic stood, signaling that the meeting was over. Handle your end, I'll handle mine. And Gio? He paused at the door. This woman of yours, the surgeon. Is she worth it? Gio thought about Yara, about the way she looked at him without fear. About the second chance she represented, the possibility of becoming someone different. Yes, he said, she's worth everything. He chose to run. 3 weeks after the evidence went public, Salvatore Ricci fled to Italy, abandoning his wife, his children, his empire. The federal indictments that followed took down 6 police officers and 2 city officials. The investigation into Marcus Baptiste's death was reopened, and though it would take years, the truth was finally on record. Yara watched the news coverage unfold from her apartment day after day, as the world she'd spent 12 years hating slowly crumbled. Corrupt cops in handcuffs, politicians resigning in disgrace, the Ricci family name dragged through headlines that painted them as exactly what they were, and through it all she felt nothing. Not the triumph she'd expected, not the satisfaction of justice served, just a vast, echoing emptiness where the rage had been. Gio found her on the 3rd night, sitting on her couch in the dark, staring at a television she'd forgotten to turn on. "Hey." He sat beside her, not touching, giving her space. "Talk to me." "I don't know what to say." Her voice came out flat, unfamiliar. "I spent 12 years waiting for this, planning for it, living for it. And now you don't know who you are without the mission." She looked at him. In the dim light from the window, his face was soft, concerned, nothing like the hardened enforcer she'd first met. "Is that what happened to you? After your mother died?" "I lost myself in the violence instead of the search. Different paths, same destination." He reached out, taking her hand. "The anger doesn't go away overnight. And the grief never really goes away at all. It just changes shape." "What shape does it take?" "Eventually it becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You get to choose what to do with it. Build something. Help someone. Find a reason to keep going that isn't about revenge." "Is that what you're doing? Building something?" "Trying to." He met her eyes. "I want to be different. I want to be someone who creates instead of destroys. And I want to do it with you, if you'll let me." She thought about her father, about the sacrifice he'd made, the truth that had been buried for so long, about the unexpected path that had led her here, to this man, to this moment. "My father used to say that the best revenge is living well," she said. "I never understood that. I always thought revenge meant making the people who hurt you pay." "Maybe it's both. Maybe it's making them pay and then living well anyway." "Maybe." She leaned into him, letting his arm come around her shoulders. "I don't know how to live well. I've been surviving so long, I forgot what it feels like to actually live." "Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time." She didn't have the words to respond, so she just held on to him, this improbable anchor in a storm she was only beginning to understand. And slowly, piece by piece, she felt the ice around her heart begin to thaw. She sat in her living room with Gio's arm around her shoulders and felt something she hadn't felt in 12 years. Peace. "It's over," she said. "The case is over." He pulled her closer. "But this—" He gestured between them. "This is just starting. If you want it to be." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm done. Done being the enforcer, done being the weapon. Dominic's giving me a choice. Legitimate work, running security for family businesses. No more blood, no more bodies." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I'm saying I want a life, a real one, and I want it with you." Hesitation would have been wise, pointing out all the reasons this couldn't work, his past, her career, the 1,000 complications of building a future with a man who had been forged in violence. Instead, she said, "Yes." The wedding took place in Jamaica 8 months later, on a beach near the village where her grandmother had been born. The journey to get there had been its own adventure. Gio had never been to Jamaica before, had never experienced the particular chaos of Yara's extended family descending on them like a loving hurricane. Aunties who pinched his cheeks and declared him too skinny. Uncles who tested his domino skills and found him wanting. Cousins who eyed him with suspicion until he proved he could handle his rum without embarrassing himself. By the 3rd day, her grandmother had declared him acceptable, which Yara assured him was high praise. "She called you a handsome devil," Yara translated after one particularly intense conversation in patois, "and she said your children will be beautiful." "Children?" Gio looked slightly terrified. "We haven't even had the wedding yet." "In my family, the wedding is just paperwork. The real commitment is what comes after." The ceremony took place at sunset on a stretch of white sand that had been in Yara's family for generations. The ocean glittered gold and rose in the fading light. Tropical flowers, hibiscus, bird of paradise, frangipani, decorated an arch made of driftwood and sea glass. Yara wore white, a simple dress that her grandmother had helped her choose, elegant without being fussy, perfect for the sand between her toes and the salt breeze in her hair. Her natural curls were loose, crowned with a circlet of white flowers that made her feel like a queen. Gio wore a suit that probably cost more than her first car, but he'd left his collar open and rolled up his sleeves to show the ink along his forearms, because she'd asked him not to hide who he was. The Valentini line on his shoulder was hidden now, but she knew it was there. A reminder of where he came from even as he stepped into something new. Her grandmother had wept through the entire ceremony, half from joy, half from the realization that her granddaughter had fallen in love with an Italian after all. "Me did tell you," she said through her tears. "Love come when you least expect it." The Valentinis had come in force, Dominic and his wife with their children, Marco with his journalist wife and their baby, Lucia and Enzo, the patriarch and the woman who had become the heart of the family. Lucia wasn't Dominic's blood grandmother, but she'd raised him after his mother died, and everyone treated her as matriarch. Francesca was there too, Gio's aunt, her face drawn with grief but her chin held high. She had chosen her children over her husband's memory, and while the choice had cost her, she seemed at peace with it. Her son and daughter stood beside her, teenagers now, learning to navigate a world where their father's name had become synonymous with shame. When Francesca embraced Yara after the ceremony, she whispered, "Thank you, for giving him a reason to be better, for showing this family that honor still matters." The reception spilled across the beach and into the night. There was food, so much food, jerk chicken and curry goat alongside Italian antipasti and fresh-caught fish prepared 3 different ways. There was music, reggae and Italian folk songs, and American standards that somehow all worked together. There was dancing that lasted until dawn, 2 families who had nothing in common except love for a couple who defied all odds. Yara's grandmother held court on a white wicker chair, accepting congratulations like a queen receiving tribute. She had lived long enough to see her granddaughter married, and the joy in her eyes was worth every struggle that had brought them to this moment. "Him is a good man," she said to Yara during a quiet moment between dances. "Hard past, but good heart. Your father would understand." "You think?" "I know." Her grandmother took her hands, the same hands that had held Yara as a baby, that had braided her hair, that had wiped her tears when Marcus Baptiste was laid to rest. "Love find us in strange ways, child. The important thing is recognizing it when it comes." The vows they wrote themselves. "I promise to heal what can be healed," Yara said, her voice carrying over the sound of the waves, "and to hold you through what can't. I promise to see the man you're becoming, not just the man you were. I promise to build a life with you that honors both our histories, the light and the dark." "I promise to protect you," Gio said, his voice rough with emotion, "not by keeping you from danger, but by standing beside you when it comes. I promise to be worthy of the second chance you gave me. I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saving mine." They kissed while the Caribbean sun set behind them and the waves whispered against the shore. Somewhere in the crowd, Yara's grandmother was singing an old Jamaican folk song about love and loss and finding your way home. After the ceremony, Yara found a moment alone with Lucia, the Valentini matriarch, the woman who had raised a generation of heirs and somehow kept her humanity intact. They stood at the edge of the water, the waves lapping at their bare feet, while the celebration continued behind them. "You're good for him," Lucia said, taking Yara's hands in her worn, elegant fingers. "He was lost for so long. Angry. Alone. I prayed he would find someone who could see past all that damage to the boy I remember. He's still finding himself. Aren't we all?" Lucia smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. "I've been married to Enzo for decades. Decades of arguments and compromises and learning to love each other through the changes. Some days I look at him and I see the young man I married. Other days I see a stranger, but I always see someone worth loving." "How do you do it? Stay together through everything this family has been through?" "Stubbornness, mostly." Lucia laughed, and the understanding that marriage isn't about finding a perfect person. It's about choosing an imperfect person and deciding every day to choose them again. "Even when it's hard?" "Especially when it's hard." Lucia squeezed her hands. "Gio has told me about his past, about the things he's done. I won't pretend it's easy to love someone who has caused so much pain, but I've watched him change since he met you. Watched him become someone who believes redemption is possible." She paused. "Love isn't about perfect people. It's about imperfect people choosing each other anyway, again and again. You've chosen well, child. Both of you." Yara felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you for accepting me, for making me feel like part of this family." "You are part of this family. From the moment Gio looked at you, I knew you were the one who would save him." Lucia kissed her cheek. "Now go. Dance with your husband. Make memories that will sustain you through the hard times." The reception went until dawn. There was dancing, reggae and Italian folk songs, and everything in between. There was food, enough to feed an army because neither family knew how to cook for fewer than 50 people. And there was joy, the kind that only happens when two families who had no business intersecting find a way to become one. At some point during the reception, Yara found herself standing beside Dominic's wife, watching their husbands argue good-naturedly about something across the dance floor. "Does it get easier?" Yara asked. "Loving them, knowing what they come from?" The other woman, elegant, composed, with a quiet strength that Yara was coming to recognize in all the Valentini women, smiled. "It gets different. You learn to hold both things at once, who they were and who they're becoming. It's not easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is." "Any advice?" "Keep your own identity, don't disappear into their world, and never let them forget that you chose them, that your love is a gift, not an obligation." She paused. "Also, learn to cook. These Valentini men have opinions about food." Yara laughed. "My grandmother would never forgive me if I started making pasta instead of rice and peas." "Then make both. That's what I do. Cultural fusion. Sunday dinners are the best kind." It was good advice. Yara filed it away for later, already imagining the arguments she and Gio would have about whose grandmother's recipes took priority. She couldn't wait. 2 years after the wedding, they stood in the nursery of their Brooklyn brownstone, staring at the crib they'd assembled together. The room was painted a soft sage green, Yara's choice, with white furniture and curtains that filtered the afternoon light into something golden and warm. On the walls hung photographs of both their families. Her father in his police uniform, his mother at a piano, their wedding day in Jamaica, the chaos of a Valentini family Sunday. Yara was 8 months pregnant, huge and uncomfortable, and happier than she'd ever been. The baby kicked constantly, especially at night, as if already impatient to join a world that was waiting for her. Gio looked terrified, the man who had faced down bullets and broken bones reduced to panic by the thought of a 7-pound infant. "What if I'm terrible at this?" he asked, not for the first time. He'd been asking variations of this question for months, each time with the same desperate uncertainty in his voice. "You won't be. You don't know that. I don't know anything about babies. I've never held one. What if I drop her? You won't drop her. What if she cries and I can't figure out why? Then I'll help you figure it out. What if—" He stopped, his jaw working. "What if I turn into my father? What if I become cold and distant and she grows up hating me?" Yara crossed to him, taking his face in her hands despite the awkward reach around her belly. "Listen to me. You are not your father. You are not the man this family tried to make you. You are the man who saved evidence to protect a dead cop's daughter, who chose justice over loyalty, who learned to be soft when everything in his life told him soft would get him killed." She kissed him gently. "You are going to be an amazing father. You are gentle, protective, and you love this child already. That's all that matters." "I don't know how to do this. I didn't have—" He stopped. "My father wasn't exactly a role model. Neither was mine in some ways. He was gone all the time, working cases, trying to save the world." She smiled, sad and fond. "But he loved me. I never doubted that. And this baby won't doubt it either, because you'll show them every day." He pressed his forehead against hers, breathing slowly. "What if the world I came from touches her? What if growing up Valentini puts her in danger? Then we protect her, together, the way we've protected each other since the beginning." "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple, but it's worth it." She pulled back to look at him. "We're worth it. She's worth it. Whatever comes, we face it together." He was quiet for a moment, then he dropped to his knees, pressing his cheek against her belly, his hands spread wide as if trying to encompass the miracle growing inside her. "I love you," he said, to the baby, to her, to both of them. "I don't say it enough. You say it plenty, but I don't mind hearing it again. I love you. I love our baby. I love this life we're building. He looked up at her. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be standing in a nursery in Brooklyn, married to a doctor, about to become a father, I would have thought they were insane. And now I think it's the only thing that's ever made sense. The baby came 3 weeks later, a daughter with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. They named her Grace because that's what she was. A gift neither of them had earned, a chance to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Gio held her for the first time with hands that had done terrible things, and Yara watched something in him heal. She's perfect, he whispered. How is she so perfect? Because she's ours. He looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. This man who had been forged into a weapon, who had spent his whole life being hard because soft got you killed. Thank you, he said, for saving me, for giving me this. Thank you for letting me. 5 years later, the brownstone was chaos. Grace was running through the garden with her cousins, Dominic's kids, Marco's kids, a whole generation of Valentinis growing up together. Sunday dinner had become a standing tradition, families converging from across the city to fill the brownstone with noise and food and the kind of love that transcended blood and history. The garden looked different now than it had when they first moved in. Yara had planted hibiscus and bird of paradise along the back fence, a reminder of Jamaica, of her grandmother, of the beach where she and Gio had promised to spend their lives together. Grace loved those flowers, would pick them and bring them inside, filling vases throughout the house with tropical color that her grandmother in Jamaica approved of during their weekly video calls. Inside, the kitchen was a beautiful disaster. Lucia was at the stove, teaching Marco's eldest to make fresh pasta the way she'd learned from her own mother 60 years ago. Yara's mother, who had finally returned from Jamaica when Grace was born, unable to stay away from her only granddaughter, was supervising the jerk chicken with a critical eye. Too much Scotch bonnet, she declared, peering into the pot. There's no such thing as too much Scotch bonnet, Yara called back, and the two women launched into their usual debate about proper Jamaican cooking, which Lucia watched with the amused tolerance of someone who had won similar arguments about Italian cuisine 1,000 times. The trauma center Yara had founded 3 years ago was thriving. The Marcus Baptiste Center for Trauma Care, funded by the Valentini Foundation, staffed by doctors who believed that everyone deserved excellent medical care, regardless of their ability to pay, had become one of the most respected facilities in Chicago, her father's name on a building that saved lives. His legacy transformed into something beautiful. She thought about him often these days. Not with the sharp, cutting grief of her 20s, but with something softer. Pride, maybe. The sense that he would have approved of what she'd built, even if the path to get here would have horrified him. Gio had found his own redemption, too. He ran security for the Valentini legitimate operations now, hotels, restaurants, the real estate holdings that made the family respectable. No more enforcement, no more violence. Just a man who had learned that protecting people didn't require destroying them. The transformation hadn't been easy. There were still nights when he woke from nightmares, when the weight of what he'd done pressed down on him until he couldn't breathe. But Yara was always there, holding him, reminding him that the past didn't have to define the future. And Grace, beautiful, fierce, stubborn Grace, was proof that broken things could become whole again. Yara stood at the kitchen window watching her daughter chase Marco's son through the flower beds. Grace was 5 now, old enough to have opinions about everything from her hairstyle to her bedtime, young enough to still believe that the world was fundamentally good and that her parents could fix anything. Gio came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. Happy? He asked. Ask me that every day, and every day the answer will be the same. Is that a yes? It's a yes. She turned in his arms, looking up at the face she'd fallen in love with against all reason. The scar on his jaw was fading. The darkness in his eyes had lifted. He looked like a man who had found peace. Hard-won, improbable, but real. I was thinking, he said, Grace needs a sibling. Does she now? She's too spoiled. Only child syndrome. We should give her someone to fight with. Yara laughed, the sound carrying through the open window to where the children played. And you've thought this through? The sleepless nights? The diapers? The fact that we barely survived the first year of Grace's life? We more than survived. We thrived. His voice softened. I want more of this. More chaos, more noise, more life. I want to fill this house with children who never doubt they're loved. Children who grow up knowing that family means something more than blood and obligation. She thought about her father, about the sacrifice he'd made, the questions that had haunted her for so long, about the unexpected path that had led her here, to this man, to this life. About Grace, who had her father's intensity and her mother's stubbornness and enough love in her small heart to light up every room she entered. My father would have loved being a grandfather, she said quietly. He used to talk about it all the time, teaching his grandchildren to fish, taking them to Cubs games, spoiling them rotten and then sending them home. He'd be proud of you. Gio's arms tightened around her. Of everything you've built. Of the mother you've become. You think? I know. He pressed a kiss to her hair. So what do you say? Want to give Grace a little brother or sister to boss around? Okay, she said, let's do it. His smile was bright enough to light the room. Really? Really? She placed her hand over his where it rested on her hip. But I want to do it differently this time. Not another pregnancy announcement over Sunday dinner. Something just for us first. What did you have in mind? Take me back to Jamaica, to the beach where we got married. Let's make another baby where we made our promises. His eyes softened. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Don't get used to it. I have a reputation to maintain. He laughed, pulling her closer, and she let herself sink into the warmth of him. This man who had crashed into her life bleeding and desperate. This man who had given her answers and asked for nothing in return except the chance to be better. This man who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I love you, she said. I love you too. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. Thank you for not letting me die on your operating room floor. Thank you for making it worth saving you. Outside, Grace shrieked with laughter as Marco caught her and swung her around. Lucia was in the living room with Enzo, the patriarch and matriarch still finding joy in each other after all these years. Dominic was deep in conversation with his wife on the back porch while their children played. And somewhere in the chaos, the next generation of Valentinis was learning what family really meant. Not blood, not obligation, not the dark legacy of violence and secrets, just love. Imperfect, complicated, hard-won love. Yara's phone buzzed with a text from the trauma center she'd founded, the Marcus Baptiste Center for Trauma Care, where her father's name lived on in a building dedicated to saving lives. Another successful surgery. Another family who would get to keep their loved one. Her father's legacy rebuilt into something beautiful. I think he would have liked you, she said quietly, looking out at the garden. My father, once he got over the whole mob thing. You think? He always said he wanted me to find someone who would fight for me. Someone who would choose me, even when it was hard. She turned to face him. You've done that? Every day since we met. I'll do it every day for the rest of our lives. Promise? Promise. He sealed it with a kiss, soft and sweet and full of all the things they'd built together from the wreckage of their pasts. Now come on, Yara said when they finally broke apart. If we don't get out there, our daughter is going to convince Marco's son to help her dig up the entire garden. She gets that from you, you know, the convincing people to do things they shouldn't. I have no idea what you're talking about. You convinced me to become a better man. That's basically the same thing. She laughed, and he laughed with her, and they walked out together into the chaos and warmth and love of the family they'd built. Into the beautiful life they'd chosen against all odds, together. And somewhere Yara was absolutely certain her father was watching, smiling, finally at peace,